Thanks so much, team, this morning. If you want to, if you wouldn't mind going to Matthew, we've been traveling through the book of Matthew. It's the beginning of the New Testament, and we're in chapter 16. So if you have that available, either a Bible or if you have it online, that's fine. I'll give you a moment just to get that. We're going to start at the sentence mark number 13. So chapter 16, but then you move down to the sentence mark number 13, and I'll read from there. That's that. Okay. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." And then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord. This shall never happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." Then Jesus told his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits its soul? What shall a man give in return for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. Truly, I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom."
Thanks, Ross. Looking at Matthew chapter 16 this morning, and we're asking the question, what does it mean to follow Jesus? It's a big question, and this is a text which we can really reflect on. If you think about a time in your life where you were personally impacted to the point that you've never forgotten, what happened to you in that incident or that experience, and you just carry that with you, right? Either the event or what was said, what you remember, you carry that with you. And the words we're looking at today are on that level of words that we need to carry with us. What does it mean to follow Jesus? As we're looking at these words, let's keep in mind next Sunday is actually our last message in Gospel of Matthew, and that leads us to the end of this section of Matthew, which has been a blessing to me personally, and I hope to you as well. And then in our schedule we continue to move through the Bible. But we could really look at this as a part 1 and next week being part 2. The words we're looking at today, I once read a book about what does it mean to follow Jesus, and it was called The Gospel According to Jesus. It's an old book, and just making the point that if you say you believe in Jesus, that involves trusting in him as a person and trusting in what he's done. And it also means that you would surrender yourself over to Jesus, actually. So the idea of believing in Jesus is really ultimate. And one of the key Bible passages in that book that I read was the one we're looking at today. And this past week, I was in the medical center with one of my children who's unwell, and it just happened to be a long wait time. And as I'm in the medical center, just sitting there, there's nothing to do, and so I'm just listening to this text on my AirPods, just listening. And I'm using the Dwell app, by the way. And the Dwell app, you have different readers. And so I was there for so long that I just kept selecting different readers. Okay? The same text, but different voices. And it was at least 8 voices, okay? Just saying this in different ways. And so I'm just taking this on as my child's on my lap, just taking it in. And the thought struck me that for all the times that I've taken this in, and for as long as I've known these words, I am still working it out in my mind and in my heart. These words that we're looking at today, what does it mean to follow Jesus? And so I hope I can convey it a little humility when we look at these words, because in no way have I arrived in mastering what Jesus has said here. Still working it out. And there are some statements here which require more explanation. As Russ read through what Jesus said, it makes you think about Jesus' identity and what he says about the church, the human soul, other phrases. But what we do find is it's here in Matthew and it's in the other Gospels as well. And so that indicates to us that this is essential to look at and to work on understanding. It affected all of the disciples there. And what we're looking at today goes to our purpose in gathering here. We've stated that our purpose as a church is to make faithful disciples of Jesus. And so if anyone really needs to be more clear about what is that, that's us. We need to know, what does it mean to follow Jesus? We need to be clear. So if I could look at these verses in 2 ways. Who is Jesus? And then what does Jesus call us to do and why? Who is Jesus? What does Jesus call us to do and why? All right. So if you have it in front of you, pick up from verse 13. Thanks, Nate. It says, Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi. Now, I've got a picture here of what it looks like today, but back in those times, ancient times, the city is located not far from the coast, and it's a beautiful viewpoint. If you're there, you can look out and you can see everything. Where it's located is in, you would say, pagan territory. It's further away from the Jewish community. And at Caesarea Philippi, there was a cave where the river would come out. And so the pagans had made a shrine to worship one of the Greek gods there. And so they named it after one of the Greek gods. And then later on, when the Romans took over, they gave this property to King Herod, the King Herod who was there for when Jesus was born. And so when King Herod was there, they made this white marble temple, beautiful, in honor of the emperor. And that was there at Caesarea Philippi. Then Herod passed away, and so now it's been kind of renamed Caesarea Philippi because Philip is the governor, and he's put his name on it, on this location. So the Greeks, the Romans, and now the local governor, they're all trying to put their identity on this location. And now, look at this verse, Jesus comes. And what's his question? It says, who do people say the Son of Man is? What is Jesus's identity? in this place? He asked this question. And so the way his followers respond is they talk, first of all, what others are saying. And what do they say? Well, Jesus is like John the Baptist, or like Elijah, or Jeremiah. Who are these men? They're prophets, they're messengers from God. They were known for their preaching and warning. Elijah was one who did supernatural acts. And the more you look at these characters, John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, there's a sense in which these are spiritual titans. When you look at their character and what they say and what they've done, these are great examples. But then Jesus asks another question, which is personal. He says, well, who do you say that I am? And that's interesting to me because we all can bring our questions to God, but often in the gospel, Jesus is actually asking us the question. What do you think? Where do you stand? So he's asking this question. And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of God. Now, this would not be the first time that Peter or the others thought this way, because they've been with Jesus for a while and they would have seen his teaching and his work. And they had this belief that Jesus was more than man, but in fact God's Son. And Peter says, you are the Christ. In other words, this is not Jesus' last name, but it's a title. It's talking about you are the Messiah, the anointed one, the one sent from God who will rule. And when Peter says this, it's meaningful, especially to him, because he's been brought up in the Bible. And so there's an example of this in the book of Daniel, chapter 7, where it talks about the Son, God's Son, who is going to rule, the one who's been anointed. And in Daniel, it talks about this Son of God who will come in great glory in the clouds of heaven with a multitude of angels. And it says this Son is like a son of man. So you've got this glorious character, but in human form. That's in Daniel chapter 7. And this figure is going to come to us and save us, and he will conquer evil, injustice, suffering. And Peter says, you are the Christ. You are that person that Daniel talks about. So this is meaningful to him. And in fact, Jesus confirms or reaffirms this at the end of our chapter here. Because what does he say at the end of the chapter? That the Son will come with many angels, right, in glory. He's saying, what you're referring to from Daniel chapter 7, that's what I'm going to do. Another example is in Psalm 2. Psalm 2 describes the Son of God, the divine Son who will break evil and injustice with a rod of iron, the one who will rule. So when Peter says this, this is where he's coming from. He's made that connection. And this is, it would have to be dramatic for them to be in this scene and Jesus asking the question and Peter responding in this way. It's dramatic because there had been misunderstanding about Jesus before. The crowds admired Jesus and would follow him, but they were confused about what he came to do. The Pharisees, the religious leaders, were threatened by Jesus and did not accept his authority. Even the disciples themselves. Remember when they were in the boat and Jesus stops the storm and they asked the question, what kind of person is this? Right? They're themselves trying to figure it out about Jesus. And so it's dramatic when Peter says, you are the Christ, you are God's Son. We can think of other people around us today that also might have a different view about Jesus, a confused view. Jesus is someone from ancient history, long time ago, a distant character. That's all I know, right? Jesus is a name used in religion, and there's there's just a mysterious sense about his name. But here's Peter saying, I know who you really are. You're the Christ, the Son of God. And one writer says, that is the article on which the Christian stands or falls. Do you know who Jesus really is? It's so significant because Jesus shows it to be significant. Let's look at the next verses. Thanks, Nate. In verse 17, Jesus answered him, Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. One way we know this is significant about Jesus' identity is because it's a blessing if you know it. If you really know who Jesus really is, that is blessing. And so whether you are aware of this or not coming in here today, but if that is your personal belief that Jesus is more than human, that he is sent from God, God's only Son, right? This promised one, you're actually blessed for knowing it. You're blessed for knowing it because you didn't figure this out yourself. It was revealed to you. It was given to you. And you might have learned this growing up. You might have had someone share this with you along the way as an adult, right? You may have gone through various crises to come to this point in your life. But again, Jesus says this was not revealed through flesh and blood. It's ultimately through my Father who's in heaven. You have this from God. That's a blessing. We're all blessed in this way. And then there are some things we need to explain here or understand. Jesus says, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. And basically what's happened here is a play on words, where Jesus says, you are Peter, Petros, and on this rock, Petra, I will build my church. So Jesus is making a play of words here. And what is this rock? The Petra. That word means bedrock. Okay, it's massive rock. It says when Jesus was buried, that the tomb for Jesus was cut out of, same word, Petra, bedrock. Okay, on the side of a hill. It's all bedrock. And Jesus says, on this rock I'll build my church. Well, what is this rock? Well, go back again to what Peter said. He says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That is the bedrock of Jesus' message. It's that rock solid core of his identity. That's at the center of Jesus' teaching. And Peter's the one who's responding in this way. And so Jesus treats him as the representative of all people who would respond in that way, who would faithfully look up to Jesus as the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's the bedrock of Jesus' church, who he is. That's who we are gathering around, right? He is the foundation for us. It's his church. He's the foundation. Then he says, I will give you the keys of the kingdom, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. So what Jesus says and his identity are the keys of the kingdom, which enables us to unlock God's kingdom for others. When we share who Jesus really is, when we live out his message, we are unlocking God's kingdom for others, like a key. And there's another passage where Jesus is rebuking the religious leaders, and here's what he says to the religious leaders: you've taken away the key of knowledge. Okay, because of the way that you live and your traditions, you've actually removed the key of knowledge, is what he says. But when I'm clear about who Jesus is and his message, I am helping unlock for other people God's kingdom. Specifically, Jesus says, whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven. Okay? So when we turn that key of the knowledge of God, when we are using what we believe about Jesus We're doing what God has decided should come to pass. We're doing God's will. So on the one hand, what I believe and do about Jesus is essential, and what God wills is decisive. All right? So it's very important that I'm clear about who is Jesus, what does it mean to follow him, and it's through that God works his will. Jesus also says, the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And here is an image of the church breaking through against the enemy's strongholds. You picture a city's gates, and it's an evil city, and the righteous force has smashed up against it, and they're breaking through. Jesus says, if you've got this belief in me, that's the side you're on. You will break through the enemy's strongholds. That's so encouraging, especially when we've just had an election, and it's always a time of questions. What's going to happen next? Not just nationally or politically, but in terms of for people who follow God. It's always that question when we have the election. And what's the state of the church here? How are we doing? Well, Jesus says, you're not going to lose. You're going to win. That's good to keep in mind in our current state. But we always come back to this question, who is Jesus? There are others who will point the way. This is what you need to do to be saved. This is how you can get to the next level. But Jesus is different. He says, I am the way. I am salvation. So we keep coming back to that. And then in verse 20, he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. So all this talk about knowing who Jesus is and using what we know to unlock, what does Jesus say next? Don't tell anybody. Now what's happened here is we have more clarity looking back on what's happened. But in that time, Jesus' followers standing there, they did not have the clarity. So when they say, Jesus, you are the Christ, they're correct, but they're still confused about what it means that he is the Christ. Because in those days, the word Christ, Messiah, for most people, had a different kind of sense to it. They saw Jesus as the Messiah as being the one who would solve their political problems, their social problems, the government problems. That's what the Messiah is supposed to do in their minds. But that's not what Jesus came to do in his first coming. He is not there for that. So he tells them, don't go out and tell people I'm the Christ, because he knows that they're still not clear. All the time, we can mix in our own preferences and aspirations to what we're looking at in Scripture. And we can often confuse our understanding by putting ourselves into the message. In verse 21, Jesus began to show his disciples he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things, be killed, on the third day be raised. And if I can share this with you, this is what we know now to be the core of the good news about Jesus, right? What Jesus says here in verse 21, that is the good news. What is it? That he must suffer, die, be buried, on the third day be raised. All right? In a sentence, that's the good news. Right? But the disciples were slow to realize it. They did not get this right away. And you remember when Jesus was raised again and he meets those two fellows on the road to Emmaus, remember? How are they feeling? They're sad, they're confused, right? They've heard that the tomb is empty, it's a mystery to them. And Jesus says, you're slow. He says, you're not getting it yet. This is what I came to do. All right? And so it doesn't surprise us when we see what's going to happen in this story. If you look at verse 22, it says, Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him, saying, far be it from you, Lord. This shall never happen to you. They don't fully get it yet. Now there's a theological issue here, because Peter sees the Messiah as the glorious Son. That's straight from the Old Testament. But the Old Testament also talks about a suffering servant, like Isaiah chapter 53, the one who is despised and rejected of men, afflicted, right? A man of sorrows. All through Isaiah it talks about this character who suffers as he serves. Peter's not putting these two together, right? No one's putting these two together, when Jesus is baptized, God says, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." God is putting it together, but no one else is. So there's a theological misunderstanding here. But it's also a personal refusal, because what Jesus is talking about is unacceptable to Peter. This is not how I view you, Jesus. This is not how I view the future. May this never happen. You suffering and dying? This can't happen. It's a personal refusal to accept what Jesus had revealed. And you look at Jesus' response to Peter. When Jesus talks with the poor and people on the margins, you see Jesus' gentleness. When Jesus talks with those who know better, who know the Bible, or religious leaders, Jesus can be very harsh even. But what Jesus says to Peter is just devastating. He says, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me." That word hindrance is the word scandal, or actually temptation. So what Peter is doing, Jesus says, is like what Satan tried to do to Jesus in the desert, tempting Jesus away from the Father's will. That's what Jesus said to Peter. And he says, you're not thinking about God's things, you're thinking about human things. Now that's insightful. That's insightful. Have we ever looked at something and said, I don't want this to happen, may it never happen? But could it be that we've actually put ourselves in the way of God's will? Right? And we've been so focused on what we wanted to happen that we didn't think about God and what God has purposed. So Jesus calls to Peter and to those with him. And what does he call? Thanks, Nate. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. Oh, there's so much to look at here. Let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. What does it mean to follow Jesus? It means to deny yourself, to say no to yourself, to take up your cross. And what today for us is an ornament or a sticker, for people in the ancient time, that only meant one thing. Your life's over. That's it. Your life's over. And in that way, to follow Jesus. Jesus is absolutely clear about what it means to follow him. It means giving up your life to follow him. There's no other way around it. And then I want us to look at the reasons for why he says this. Look at what he says, and he says 3 times the word for. If you see it there. It says, for whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Why does Jesus say, you've got to give your life over, surrender it over to him, to follow him? And here's some more clarity from Jesus. If you try to save your own life, you'll end up losing it anyway. And one writer talks about how traditionally, when we talk about what do I do with my life, one view is to say, well, you just lose yourself in your place in society. You've got a place in society, so just lose yourself in that, where you are, your status. You've got duties to do, just lose yourself in those duties, right? At the end, you're going to lose all of that. Others say, especially in our modern culture, it's all about finding yourself. So we've got the resource, we've got more money, we've got the opportunity. So whatever your desire leads you to, you follow it, find yourself that way. And again, you'll still lose in the end. But here's what Jesus says. If you lose your life for my sake, that's the key, you'll find your true self. That's what he's saying there. If you lose for Jesus, if you give your life over to Jesus, this is something different. It's a different outcome if you give your life over to Jesus. Here's another reason. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his own soul? What shall a man give in return for his soul? And Jesus tells the story of the rich fool, remember? This person who had been successful in his work and had big plans for his future, right? But in God's view, God says, you're a fool. And God said, tonight, your soul is required of you, and now who will own what you have prepared? What God is saying in that story is, no matter what you amass, and no matter what you're aiming for, you're going to have to give it up anyway. You will lose it anyway. It will be surrendered anyway. So, what is really valuable here if you're going to lose those things anyway? It's you. God says you are really valuable. It's your soul that really matters. Not the stuff, not the dreams and the plans. It's you. And the third reason Jesus says is, for the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and he will repay each person according to what he has done. And here Jesus is giving vision for what the future will look like. He says, I will come back and I will deal with every person according to what they've done. What do you mean what they've done? What they've done with Jesus. What they've done with the life that God has given to them. He will repay. He'll repay. And you say, well, what's that vision going to look like? Angels? Glory? We get a little preview of that in the next part of the story. Because what Jesus shows next is a trailer of that glory of when he comes back. And we'll look at that next week. But here is some hope for our hearts. To be clear on what's important, that's actually hope. Because we can get confused and we can get distracted. And so what Jesus is giving to us is the grace of clarity. What he's saying is that my old self must die today. All right, this is the day we've been given. And the old me, I've got to say no to it. And it's got to be given over. It's got to be surrendered. It doesn't happen naturally. It doesn't happen automatically. I must choose to deny myself and give over my life. Jesus has given to us the grace of realizing what is really valuable. We get so busy about what we're doing. How about yourself? How about you as a person? That's what's really valuable. And Jesus tells us to look out to the glory of his return. This challenges what I'm doing with the life that God has given me when I see these words. What does it mean to follow Jesus? What am I doing with my life? It challenges how I view myself. We can look at the facts about our life and past incidents and experiences, and in our human nature we do put our own spin on what's happened to us in the past or what we're going through now. This happened to me and I was the victim. Or this is happening to me but I'm going to be the hero, right? And we like to express our own story about what happened to us and what's going on now and what we want to happen. We like to be the author of our life. But look what Jesus is doing here, right? As Philippians chapter 2 tells us, he empties himself and he comes down, humbles himself as a servant. He's obedient to the point of death. Whatever cross or self-denial that I've had to experience, look at what Jesus has gone through for our sake. He actually takes up a cross. He actually loses his life. And he does this for our sake. So that challenges me and gives perspective about what I'm doing with my life. But it also encourages me as well. Because when Jesus says, what is the value of your soul? When he's asking that question to his followers in front of him, you know where he's going next. He's going to go to Jerusalem. And he's going to offer his life for their souls. That's the value that he sees in them. And that's the value that he sees in you. So when we see these words about what does it mean to follow Jesus, and if we have already made the confession, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God, and if we already have been trying to deny ourselves and give our life over to Jesus, can I remind you that this is how Jesus sees you? You're so precious in his sight that he's given his life for you. That's what he has provided. He hasn't held anything back. So in our struggle, in our failures, in our questions about how will we make it, here's Jesus saying, I've already given it all for you. I'm not going to hold anything back for you to do what you need to do to follow me. That's the life. What are we doing with Jesus? Father, these are the words we want to carry with us. Lord, thank you for the clarity that Jesus' words bring. And we'll do well to keep repeating it to ourselves again and again, because this is our daily task and it's our joy. I pray, God, that you would keep it in front of our eyes, that we would give our lives over to you, that we might enjoy your new life. Amen.